Hi everyone. Hi. Thank you very much for joining us and welcome. This is episode 2 of series 2 of our lockdown live travel chats here with Thelma and Louise Club. This series we're very much focused on helping you get back out on the road when all of this is, if not over, at least mostly behind us. And so we are bringing in women who can help equip you with the tools that you need to hit the road as soon as it's safe to do so. Who are we talking to this week, Anna?
Yeah, tonight we are chatting with Kelly Lewis about how we can use travel to empower ourselves and other women. And Kelly has been involved in women's travel for such a long time, and she sees travel as a way to connect to our personal power. She has already helped thousands of women to travel and see the world through her pioneering guidebooks called Go Girls Guides, through an annual travel festival for women, and her boutique true company, Damsley. Without any further ado, here is Kelly. Hi, Kelly.
Everyone. Hi, thank you for having me.
Nice to have you. So, Kelly, you've been involved with women travel for such a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us, was a particular moment that, in the past that made you realize how empowering, sorry about that, how empowering travel is? And was there a particular moment in the past?
So many. I mean, so many more than one. Yeah, I've been in the women's travel industry since 2010, when there really wasn't a women's travel industry. And I started my career in this space as a journalist. I was a news and arts reporter. And one night I had a dream in the middle of the night that I was staring at a hot pink guidebook for women. And in my dream, I was going, oh my gosh, this is totally your calling. Like, why didn't you follow this? Somebody else is going to do this. And that dream really was how everything started. I woke up the next day, actually totally didn't remember it until halfway through my work day. And I was sitting at my office in this like terrible, like fluorescent light, kind of like dungeony sort of vibe that I had in this office space. And the dream came flooding back to me, and it like Wile E. Coyote like knocked me out of my chair. And I started Googling because I was like, it's 2010, like for sure somebody has done this. And I started Googling, and I couldn't find anything around women's travel, anything specific to women's travel, aside from like a couple of blogs. I couldn't find any guidebooks for women. And so I remember making a promise to the idea itself, like, if you'll stick with me for just a couple months longer, I will do whatever it takes to bring you to life. So like, and I did. I ate tuna out of the can when I got super broke. I lived on rice and beans. You know what I mean? And I also think that it's important to tell people who are listening that when I created what would become the world's first series of guidebooks for women, I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea how to write a guidebook, no idea, like, how to publish a guidebook, but you just kind of have to start taking steps towards what you think is the right direction. And so many times along the way of my travels, what I was realizing was that my girlfriends were sharing things with me that my guidebooks weren't. So like my girlfriends were telling me like, oh, be careful of this bus station because it's kind of sketchy at night, or like, hey, make sure you bring extra tampons to Argentina because you're not going to find them, or like things like that I feel like other women needed to know. So I was like connecting to my friends as the grapevine, but then like my guidebooks wouldn't say anything about it. So that's when I started thinking like, okay, well, if I could do this myself, what would I include in it? How would I make it different? How would I make it applicable to the needs of women who travel, specifically if you're traveling by yourself? And so that's how it all began, really. And that was 11 years ago.
And how much traveling had you done by that point?
I had lived in New Zealand for a year. So I did a working holiday visa. I lived in New Zealand for a full year, which was like the best time of my life. I actually ended up working for a company that did Lord of the Rings tours in Queenstown. So like people would come up to me and speak Elvish in like full robes, and I would sell them replica swords. And like, I mean, it was just such a fantasy. And I remember having a friend come visit and she was like, this is not the real world that you live in. I was like, what do you mean? I pay my bills. I have a job, you know? Like, now looking at it, I was like, that was really not like, it was like Peter Pan land. I mean, it was just so much fun. And, but in that time I ended up living in a 2-bedroom house with like 6 people. 3 who lived downstairs, 2 in the yard, 1 in the other room. Like, I remember the first 2 weeks of living there, I was like, who actually lives here though? It took me so long to figure it out. But those people ended up being my travel family, and they would tell me about places that I wasn't really interested in until they talked about it, like China, you know? I never really knew that I was curious about going to China, especially because I grew up in Hawaii, which, you know, has a strong Asian culture attached to it. So China, Japan were never really like big focuses of mine until other people started telling me about them. And then I was like, oh yeah, I really want to go and see that. Yeah. So I think so much of travel comes from this like invaluable network of information passed from other travelers, and they inspire you to see other places and do other things that you didn't think maybe you would want to do. So
definitely. And that was 10 years ago, did you say? 2010?
Yeah. So I lived in New Zealand in 2009. And then after I finished my working long holiday, I went to South America, and I backpacked from one coast to the other, taking buses with those friends that I lived with in New Zealand. And so that was like really kind of informative. And then when we broke apart and I was traveling solo through South America, that's when I really started leaning on my girlfriends who lived in different places. I had a friend that lived in Buenos Aires at the time. And, you know, I was just really obsessed with South America in particular. And yeah, and then in South America, I started becoming obsessed with Southeast Asia. And that's how Thailand became our very first guidebook, because one of my friends was like, you have to go to Southeast Asia if you love backpacking. And I was like, okay. So,
why Thailand? Out of all the countries that you'd been to, why did Thailand make it into the first guidebook?
Because it was a place that a lot of backpackers were going. And it was a place that I really wanted to go. Like, a lot of the places that I went to do guidebooks was like selfishly motivated. I just wanted to go there. You know, I wanted an excuse to see every corner of Thailand and visit every village and see everything that I could. And it was such a like beautiful time, because we really I went with a friend who was taking photos for me, and we just kind of made it up as we went along. Like, every night I would do like a download on my computer of what we saw, where we went, what guest houses we checked out, what the city orientation looked like, things like that. Mm-hmm. But then we would just get lost in adventures, and we, you know, couch surfed. We ended up staying with this guy in like a hut in northern Thailand, and he took us on his motorbike with his husky and us and him on this like tiny scooter into these hot springs. And like, we just, you know, we had adventures, and it was just, I live for adventures like those, like moments you cannot plan for.
Do you think that women's travel has changed a lot over the last 10 years? The things that you're writing
for sure.
Is it
different? I mean, I think there are a lot more resources now for women who are interested in traveling than there ever were, for sure. Like, I think, you know, there are so many great solo female travel blogs. There are lots of women's tour companies. I own one, Damesley. And so there are a lot of ways for women to travel, whether they want to travel solo and be more informed, or they want to travel on a group. I think, you know, when I was just starting out with Go Girl, I would be asked to explain a lot, like, why is women's travel different? Or like, how do women travel differently than men? Like, why do women just need a guidebook? And I think I'm no longer asked those questions. Like, it's very clear. We all understand that we have different needs as travelers. And like, by the way, it's not just a women and men thing. Like, now we're finally talking about different people who travel, how to travel, you know, and like the experiences of women of different colors who travel, the experiences of travelers of different physical abilities. Like, it's awesome that we are talking about this, because no one person's experience is the same across the board. Definitely.
And is that with your Women's Travel Festival that you started, was it 6 years ago?
2014. So we're going into the 8th annual year, which is crazy.
Yeah. How has that grown over the years?
Yeah, so Women's Travel Fest started because I went on a cross-country book tour from Tucson, Arizona, where I was living, to New York City when I moved there. And I was talking to women across the country about traveling. And I loved these kinds of conversations where we just talked about where we went, where we wanted to go, how it fixed us, how it fueled us, how it healed us, what we loved. And they, on tour, we would talk for hours. We'd go out to dinner, and this kind of like electrical energy would happen between us. And so when I got to New York City, I was like, I want to do this in a bigger way. Again, having no clue how to throw a giant conference of any kind, like no idea, no money, so a lot of this was like a wish and a prayer and a credit card. I mean, I didn't know what I was doing. So, I mean, I'm still figuring it out. We all are. So when I got to New York, I said, I'm going to do Women's Travel Fest in a bigger way. I met an incredible woman named Michaela Malazzi, who became the director of the show. And really in her kitchen, we sat down and we thought, okay, well, what would we want to talk about? And who do we know that's an expert in that thing? Or who do we know that would be a great speaker, and what could they talk about? And we kind of like mind mapped different things. And the show began as a one-day event. But it took off really quickly because it was it was the first women's travel event of that scale. And so Samantha Brown was our keynote speaker, and Expedia came on as our platinum sponsor, and like everything kind of went really quickly. And then ever since then, it's been a 3-day conference. And it takes me and Michaela, we're still the only people that do it. And then I have like some of my best friends who fly out every year and help me man the check-in table and stuff gift bags and do all the things. And like, it is a marathon, but it is probably the most rewarding thing I've ever created, just to give a physical space to these kinds of electrical conversations, and like have women together being like, oh, I want to go to Bali. Oh, I went to Italy and this is what it was like. Oh, I stayed in this hostel. You have to go here. And like, I love that so much. So.
Kelly, that must be such an amazing experience and energy in that room, to be, transmitted in a short time from one woman to another.
It totally is. And, we talk about safety, but we also talk about race. We talk about, budget. We talk about like how we've traveled and where we travel. And it's really a celebration of travel itself. And like, that is what I love so much, because it's not like how to start a travel blog. It's really just like, we love to travel. This is where we went. We want to hear where you're going. And like, it's just so much fun to talk about it.
You've got 2021 dates, haven't you?
Yep. Yeah. So 2021, normally we've always held our show on International Women's Day, which is March 8th. So almost for the past 7 years, it's been in March, but obviously Corona has changed things. So I've pushed the show to end of August. So it's going to be in Portland, Oregon, August 20th through the 22nd. And the kickoff party is my 35th birthday. So I get to double up.
I mean, there as well. Who have you got speaking?
So I'm still working on it. And it's kind of a weird time, to be honest, like as an event organizer, because I'm struggling with like, how do I even ask someone to come and speak in front of a group full of people? Like, what options am I going to give them?
Yeah.
And like for my participants, for the people who come, I've created a bunch of COVID protocols and safety points. And we're lucky that our venue is indoor and outdoor, so we can really space people out outside and put up a screen outside for people who don't want to be in a room with other people. But for speakers, it's hard. It's really hard. So, and also it's still, and I'm not like, I am not tone deaf to what the world is. And if by June or July, it's still not looking like August is going to happen, like I'm going to have to pull it and push it. And
would you do it virtually? So.
I don't, no. I think I can talk to my community virtually. I love, interacting with them virtually, but like, I don't want to pretend that a virtual meetup is in any way a swap for the real thing, because it's such a magical, transformative event. Like, careers have been launched, friendships have been forged, women who've met like their new best travel friend have happened at Women's Travel Fest, and that comes from spending a few days in person together. And so,
what sort of women attend?
Is
there something kind of unifying demographic there?
No, that's what's great about it. So, like, you have women who just graduated from college. You have women who just retired. I think I've always been really, really mindful of inclusion and sharing different stories and having different perspectives on my stage. So our audience is probably one of the most racially and age-wise diverse that you'll find. So, and I'm super proud of that. Like, I want to continue providing a space for women to share their varied experiences because everything matters,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine the same. Sorry, you go ahead.
So me, yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about your tours because you put tours together. Yeah, how do you research those tours, and what do you look into when you put the tour together for Downsay?
Yeah. So the second day of Women's Travel Fest, we always do sort of specialty workshops. So like photography-based workshops, creative writing workshops, how to pitch, travel writing workshops. We do more industry-focused things. And so I was getting a lot of demand from the community to actually go traveling. People were like, this is awesome. Let's take this on the road. So I created Damesley as a way to blend those two things. So initially we started doing tours for creative and professional women. So a photography workshop through Grand Canyon, Antelope Canyon, and Horseshoe Bend, led by a female photographer, or a creative writing workshop that combines horseback riding through the Rocky Mountains with creative writing workshops. So we did a lot of mashups like that. And initially it was just destinations that I was super familiar with. So we have a great Hawaii tour called Islands and Identity. And that combines, working with a life coach with surf lessons and hula lessons and like really seeing Hawaii. And like, that's something that I can uniquely do because I'm from Hawaii. I grew up there. So, in Arizona, I spent 10 years in Arizona. So it's like, I started with destinations that I really knew. And then as the company grew, and it happened very quickly, I feel like I was reached out to by a lot of other people in the industry who know other destinations. And together we sat down and I said, this is what I'm looking for. This is my audience. Tell me more. What can we do? And we kind of teamed up. And so that's how most tour companies, I think, operate. They work with suppliers and really flesh out a destination from that local perspective. And so that's what we started doing later on. So now we have both workshop-based trips and actual like trips, like to Morocco. And then Corona hit. So it's been really difficult.
So how were you were able to run a few tours before Corona hit? What sort of, again, similar question, what sort of women are drawn to these tours?
Largely career-based women. So when we started this tour company, it was a noticing that travel had either catered to women, like Kentucky style backpacker, like under 25 crowd,
yeah,
or it was like big bus tours for an older demographic. And so us in our 30s, professional aged women living in New York City, we were like, we have money to spend and we want to go travel, but it seems that the industry is ignoring us and like what we want. So I started creating tours that I thought spoke to women like me. And so that's generally who joins are women, between 25 and 35. Although I did take a woman who was 82 to Cuba and she had an absolute blast. She was like the life of the party.
Yeah.
It's so fun. And yeah, but generally they're in their 30s or 40s, professional aged, relatively high income. We've got a lot of real estate agents, doctors, lawyers, executives, women who have money to spend and want to meet other people as they travel the world. And so, yeah, I love taking women traveling.
And how does the group work together? I mean, is there a magic number? Is there,
we don't take more than 8. So we specifically do small group tours because I do believe there is a magic number. Like, I think if you have too many people, it doesn't work. And if you have too few people, I mean, it can. I've had great tours of 4 and 5 people, but yeah, it's always a gamble, right? Because sometimes you have guests who think they want to travel with other people and they realize they don't. You know,
with those sort of guests, because with Thelma and Louise we do sometimes get large groups of women, and occasionally we do hear stories like you're saying. I mean, it happens wherever you are, whatever you do in the world, there's always going to be the occasional person who doesn't quite know how to gel with the rest of the group. Have you got any tips for managing the more difficult people in the group?
Yeah, I think for people who don't know how to gel, that's an easier fix than people who intentionally want to be negative and find other people to share in that negativity. I've had both many times. I think people who just don't know how to gel, you know, I try to just be as kind and open as I can to really make them feel like they're welcomed and they're a part of the group. The people who are negative, I have really personally struggled with because I put so much of myself into the company. And so it can be really hard, you know, when someone doesn't like the trip and there's just nothing you do is going to make them like it. Like it's just who they are. They'll find fault in anything. And I've tried really hard to appease those kinds of people. And then I've also recently in the past few years gotten to a point where I'm like, nothing I can do. Like I can't, you know, there's nothing I can do. I'm going above and beyond for you. It's affecting the rest of the group. And like, there's really nothing you can do about it.
Yeah. So
you just have to know, like, you know, not everybody's going to like you. Not everybody's going to like your stuff. And, you know, even if you do something like managing your expectations, I think is really important. Like very clearly saying, this is what we're doing at 10 o'clock and at 12 o'clock and at 1 o'clock and at 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
I've certainly made the mistake in the beginning of being much more like open, like, oh, well, we could do this and this is over here to see, or you guys can choose to do this. And like giving people too many choices, not a great option when you have a group of people. It's much easier to be like, this is the schedule. So set expectations very clearly and adhere to them. And then remove your personal attachment, I think, to the outcome, because you try to please everyone.
I guess the point that the reason people come for a tour with you is because they have aligned their tastes with the sort of thing that you're interested in. And so they're trusting you to make these decisions for them. And so in a way, it takes away the stress of making those decisions about what to do at 10 o'clock, what to do at 1 o'clock, what to do at 3 o'clock. So I
think people come on a tour with me for 3 reasons. Number one, they want to see a beautiful place and they don't want to have to plan any logistics, figure out where they're eating, what time, and all the stuff.
Yeah.
They don't have to do any of that. That's a big thing. Number two, they want to meet another group of women, like-minded women, because they want to meet people they can travel with independently later on. So like that's another big thing. And then lastly, I think is like they're connected to me either through Travel Fest or they know of me because they followed my story over the past decade or whatever. The other thing that I've realized as a business owner is like I am really great at organizing tours and at small details. Like I really excel at large events, at tours, at like logistics. But I don't think that I'm necessarily the best person to lead a group of people because having the weight of everyone's good time expectation on my shoulders does not lead me to be my best and highest self because I am the owner of the business. So the best thing that I did for myself is I hired tour leaders. And like that changed everything for me. Yes, because, and at first I thought, you know, oh, I'm going above and beyond and I'm picking them up from the airport. But what I didn't realize was on the other end, they were like, why are you picking me up from the airport? Like, what are you doing here driving this van? You know, and so it like, and it also was like, what am I doing? This is not my highest purpose. Like, this is not the best way that I can serve my community. So bringing on help for things, even though it means giving up a percentage of profit, is like such a game changer for me. And I don't know, like I've talked about it with my team and I feel like, you know, if and when we get back to tours, I probably will only lead maybe 1, maybe 2 tours a year. And that's like my personal involvement of leading trips.
How did you go about finding the tour guides? Because you must want people that you really trust, that you really way around your brand.
Yeah.
Know what
they are people that I know generally, or that I've met while traveling. I met one of my tour leaders in Antarctica, actually, on the trip. And and she's awesome. So it is hard because it's like you have to find people who understand that this isn't a trip. This isn't like a vacation. Like it's a lot of work. And you also have to find someone who is perpetually like 6 steps ahead, you know? So like we just ate breakfast. Cool. Someone's going to have to go to the bathroom in a half an hour. Someone's like, where are we going to pull over when that happens? Someone's going to get hungry in 2 hours. What snacks do we have in the bus for when that happens?
The ultimate parent.
The ultimate parent. Someone's going to want to jump in the water. So do I have a towel ready for them? Like how much water do we have in the car? How cold is that water? Like all of these things. It's a lot of work. It is. But it is also, if you're a people person who also enjoys travel, there's no better job. It's logistics more than anything.
Yeah. And what tips have you got for a woman who is just starting to think about travel, not necessarily by herself, but is just looking to kind of dip into the world of travel? Maybe she hasn't done much travel that she's organized herself, much independent travel before. Where does she start?
I think starting around where you live is a great option.
Especially at the moment.
Yeah, totally. So I live in Portland, Oregon, and there's so many things around me that are awesome. And so really like all of last year was dedicated to exploring that. Like all of the national parks around me, Crater Lake is near me. There's so many hikes through the forest near me. There's just so many cool things to see in our own backyard. And we get so focused on ticking off countries that we stop thinking about, what it's like to be alone in our city. So I think like where women get hung up a lot of times when it comes to traveling solo is like the transportation logistics. Like I know my mom was always like, but how am I going to get on a bus and how am I going to get on a train, especially in a country that doesn't speak your language? That's difficult. And then also like getting really comfortable with eating alone and like being alone. You know what I mean? I think that's a real big barrier for people is like, I don't feel comfortable eating alone. So before you go out in the world, just take yourself out in your city and like go to a restaurant by yourself and try not to lose yourself in your phone, but like really be aware of who's around you and, what is the sights and the smells and the tastes and, how comfortable are you being in your own company? And then once you're comfortable with that, then you can take it on the road. You can do anything. And then once you do get comfortable with transportation logistics, so like trains, subways, things like that, I feel like if you can navigate one city's train system, you can replicate that in any major city.
What about meeting people? Because it can get lonely by yourself.
I actually feel like I'm never really alone when I'm traveling. No. I've never been more surrounded by people than when I'm by myself, if that makes any sense. Like, you think you're going to be alone, but what you don't realize is people are constantly coming up to you being like, hey, can I sit with you? Hey, like forever. And so I actually find that I'm very rarely alone when I'm traveling solo. And if I want to meet other people, you have to sort of take it upon yourself to put yourself in social situations. I definitely have a very distinct memory of moving to New Zealand when I first got there and being super lonely, like so lonely, because I was staying in a hostel, but nobody was really talking to me. And I remember walking around the city and like sitting outside of a museum by myself and just seeing other people and like mentally begging them to talk to me. Like, please talk to me. And nobody did. Nobody did. But that was in that moment, I realized like, okay, well, I can also walk over to these people and talk to them. I also have power of mind, like the way that I interact with the world. So, and I did, and I do remember that, like that terrifying loneliness of being like, somebody noticed me, somebody talked to me. Like I'm here by myself. I obviously want to talk to the world, but like people don't instinctively know that. They just see you sitting alone at a table, which is like, so it's also up to you. Like how comfortable are you going up to people and saying like,
it's really hard.
hey, what are you reading? Or like, hey, I'm so sorry, but I'm new here. Like, can you tell me where the best beach is in town? You know, things like that, I think really changed the course of my travel, is when you are owning the fact that you're vulnerable. So like, I will always go up and say like, hey, I'm so sorry, but like, I don't really know my way around here. You know, instead of just being like, you know, what's the best restaurant? like, I hope it's okay if I'm talking to you. Like, you know, you have to really be kind of humble in inserting yourself into other people's spaces. But what you'll find more often than not is that people are really accommodating, and people generally at their core, what travel has taught me more than anything is that the world is mostly safe and people are mostly good. People want to help you, and they will. And when you end up in a situation, and you will, that is kind of scary, and you feel like helpless, what you will realize is that angels from freaking nowhere will come and help you. Like all of a sudden, like, you know, it's happened to me so many times in traveling when I've like emitted this kind of beacon of like, help me, I'm scared. And then all of a sudden someone's like, hey, you need help with your bag? Or like, hey, are you lost? Or like, hey, do you need some, like, people are aware of what's happening. How aware are you? You know?
So right. It's about letting that bit of vulnerability show, because then it opens what people see as slight chink in what they perceive as armor. And then they're so much more open to coming up to you, or, you know, answering you in a much more open way. And that leads to friendship, and that leads to deeper engagements and better travels, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
That's been my experience.
It's also safety. Like the more people who know of you, who are aware of you, the safer you are. You build the network.
Absolutely.
So talk to everyone. I mean, you don't have to give them your social security number, but like talk to everyone, you know, say hi.
And smile.
Ask them about themselves. Tell them about yourself. You know, like that's the whole point of traveling. It's like, it's so, if you ask any traveler, I'm sure you two would have exactly the same responses. Like, what's your favorite place and why? It's usually the people. It's the people that make the place so great. It's not the place itself, you know, it's the time you had there with the people that you met.
Which is so often down to the sort of self that you project out into that world as well. You can have a completely different experience in the same place, depending on your mood in the moment.
Totally. Yes. You can be in the world's most gorgeous place and feel awfully depressed and alone. And like in your memories of that place, you'll remember how pretty it was, and you'll remember how alone you felt. Like, you know, it's always going to come down to people. People make a trip. And if you're alone, like what's great about being alone is like you are instantly grouped into other people. Like people just kind of pull you in. So you're really not, I think that I meet way more people when I travel by myself than when I travel with someone else. Because if I'm traveled with someone else, it's almost like, you know, oh, they're spoken for. Like, oh, she's with her. Like you're categorized. And so therefore people don't need to make an effort because you're not alone.
So what sort of traveler are you right from the start, when you start thinking about where you want to go? What sort of destinations do you look at? How do you start planning? Do you plan a lot, or you leave things much more open to spontaneity when you get there? And do you prefer to travel by yourself or in a group?
Yeah, I feel like my travel styles changed a lot. Like I think, you know, in my 20s, and this is also a bigger thing about branding and having your companies grow with you. Because in my 20s, I was very much like a backpacker. I wanted to stay in hostels and do all the things. Now the idea of sharing a room with 12 people appeals to me less. So, you know, I want to meet people. I'm a social traveler, but I also have a bigger budget than I would when I was a backpacker, you know, and I didn't have, like, those were my only options. So I like to plan, and I always say this to other travelers, is like, plan at least the first night or the first 2 nights when you get from the airport. Like, so the first thing you have to figure out is like the first 2 nights, getting from the airport and getting to the place that you're staying. And then I like to leave it open, because I might find that I meet someone who says, oh, you should go to this city, or, oh, you should check out, you know, this hotel, or like, oh, I heard a really great thing about this sauna or pool. And so I like to keep my itinerary a little bit open and have a general idea of what I want to see and do.
Yeah.
And then just keep it to the universe.
And how do you see travel changing after the pandemic? So in the next few months, in the next few years, do you see the tours that Damesy does having to change? Do you see your own travels changing?
Yeah,
And
I
how?
do. I do. And I think that, like, to be totally transparent, I think that 2020 changed me a lot. It did kind of take the wind out of my sails when it came to the travel industry, because all of a sudden I was in a position where I had spent 11 years, a full solid decade, helping people to travel, talking about traveling. And then I felt like, what do I have to say now that that thing has been taken away from me? Like, you know, what do I bring to the world? What's my greater purpose? And so that's been really hard to reconcile with. And I think a lot of travelers feel like that, is like, this is the thing, this is who I am, this is what's defined me. So like now we have to, we think about ourselves as travelers in a wider sense. Like, yes, I'm a traveler first and foremost, but I'm also, you know, a woman in a relationship, a woman building a community in a new city, a creator, a writer, a journalist, a podcaster, like all of these different things, because you can't just be defined by the things that we used to. So it's changed everything. And in terms of the travel industry, I think collectively we all sort of feel like the wind's been taken out of our sails. And so that sucks on its face. But then at the same time, there's been this really beautiful thing that has happened, at least to me, is like, I have never been more creative in my life than when I am forced to sit in one place. So I can't go really anywhere outside of, you know, I can't get on an international flight right now. So I've been incredibly creative and have written a book and have come up with new things that I think define who I am and what my highest purpose is to the world. So I think what we're seeing and what we will see is these new sort of like spirit-based businesses, wellness travel, really talking about travel as a robust definition of, you know, what it brings to our lives, how it empowers us, how it makes us better and whole and more complete. I think that the old mood of travel, like I worry for cruise ships, you know, I don't really worry for hostels. Like, I feel like hostels are going to have a bit of a struggle, but I think backpackers will always be there.
Yeah.
So, but I definitely think, you know, we're going to have to see vaccination cards. We're already seeing airlines saying like, you have to be vaccinated to fly. I don't feel comfortable mandating that for my tours. So I think probably, and the other thing about the industry side of things is like, I have all of these tours that were supposed to go in 2020 that could not, that now have to go in 2021 or 2022. So after that ends, after you fulfill the old obligations that you've just kind of postponed, then you get to redefine like, where's the business going? Like, what do you really want to do? And I think for me, for Jamesley, we'll start doing a lot of more retreats, because, you know, this time has given me an opportunity to think about, like I was saying, like purpose, potential, passion. And something that I'm really passionate about is resilience and finding your personal power. And I've always done that through travel. Like, every time that I've done something really hard, I can carry that through my life. So it's like, you know, you end up in a sticky situation and you think to yourself like, oh, you hiked Machu Picchu, like, you've got this, you know, like every time that I survived, I proved to myself that I could.
Yeah.
Also, you know, as a human, grew up in an environment that told me that I couldn't, constantly. So that's very much who I am, like a resilient and defiant woman. And so that is like where I've been shifting my focus, is like, you know, yes, travel is a great way to do that, but I think there are other ways to become more resilient, so that things like, you know, 2020 or someone telling you that you're to this or that, you know, doesn't completely wobble you. And so that's sort of where I'm shifting my focus as a business.
But it sounds like the experiences that you've gained through traveling have helped you massively during this time of not being able to travel.
Yeah,
those
for sure.
transferable skills.
For sure. Yeah. It's interesting because with the book, so I wrote a book called Tell Her She Can't, Inspiring Stories of Unstoppable Women. And this book started just as me, like, I had this idea in my head for a really long time, because I grew up in a really abusive environment where I was constantly told that I was too fat, I was too stupid. I would never make it. I was going to be a stain on society, you know, that nothing I did would change this fate, that like I was this person and that was it. And so I really had to use that as fuel to push myself forward and be like, you know what, I'm going to be even more successful than you. Like, just watch, you know, just watch and see what I do. And so I do attribute a lot of what I have done in my career and sort of like machete trailblazing kind of hacking to that same kind of spirit of being like, you know, you're not going to define me or limit me.
A rebel.
A rebel. Yeah, very much. And like, you know, screw you. Like, I'm going to tell you what I can and can't do. And so I think, you know, through my years of Women's Travel Fest, I would share the stage with some really powerful women. And what I realized is that my story is not very unique at all. Like, so many women who have accomplished incredible things came from really difficult childhoods, or were limited, you know, verbally or physically by other people. And so in this time period of 2020, when I had nothing else to do, I was like, well, why don't I start actually unpacking this and like doing interviews? So I started calling women that I knew who had accomplished things and who had gotten through things, and they introduced me to other women. And then, I mean, before I knew it, I had talked to almost 100 different women who had overcome different forms of adversity and used it as fuel. And really the question became, is like, what makes someone inspired to be resilient and use this as fuel in terms of being limited, and like what makes someone, you know, other people not able to handle it and to totally crump. So it's been really, really interesting doing this project. And what I realized in the course of it was that I was sort of stitching together like the essence of feminine resilience. and so Tell Her She Can't is me. It's my story, and it's also the story of 35 other women who have gone through things that I haven't. Things like racism, domestic violence, overcoming cancer, hair loss, limb loss. I mean, just like really amazing story.
Yeah. But you found something that unites you all.
Yeah. And that is like the spirit of, it's basically the screw you spirit. I don't know a nicer way of saying that, but it really is, because I feel like, you know, I read a lot of personal development and self-help, and it's always like forgive and meditate and like, and that's awesome. But I also believe that anger is a really beautiful and really powerful emotion, and like it's okay to feel that too. And I think that the world is always like limiting women, you know, like, oh, you shouldn't be so like, don't be this or that. I don't think defiance is something that's really like embraced in women, but also like, fuck that. You can feel whatever you want to feel, you know, and how you use your emotions is totally up to you. And so I'm just like over anyone trying to limit anyone. I call them the naysayers or the block makers, because it's crap. And the thing that sucks is that if it happens to you as a child, you hear these words in your head over and over and over, you know, you can't do this. You're not good enough for this. You're not worthy enough for this. And so then that creates this dialogue where you're constantly like, wondering if it's, you know, you don't even realize it's other people's words because they become your words. And I certainly heard that in travel, you know, in like certain specific instances when I've been hiking or doing something really physically strenuous. I've definitely heard words washing over me being like, you can't do this. You're not strong enough to do this. Or creating businesses that I had no idea how to create. It's like, but you have to kind of show those voices that they're not in charge and that you are in charge, and you get to decide, you know, what you do and don't do and what you can and can't do.
This book sounds great. When's it published?
So it's coming out this summer. I'm really excited. I wish I had like a firm date, but I don't. But you can get more information at tellhershecan't.com. And the other cool part of this project is like, I have been getting so many amazing stories that I've turned it into a podcast, which is also launching next month. So it's awesome. And what's cool is like when you start talking about, I mean, these are for a long time, like these are things I held a lot of shame around, like a lot of shame around. I didn't want people to know that, you know, that I thought this way about myself, that I was treated this way, you know. It's a heavy thing, but when you start talking about your story, you like free yourself from it. you know, and you become healed by that. And then every other person that you meet in your truest version of you is also the truest version of them. So I'm getting stories from women who are like, you know, I was told I couldn't play basketball and now I'm the forward for University of Minnesota. Like I was told that I was crazy and now I'm, you know, just like so many stories. And I think that is just so humbling and beautiful and like such an honor. And I really feel like this is maybe the highest gift that I can give in the world.
I think it gives a lot of women a tool on how to react and how to, you know, stop that negative thinking, even if it's the interior thinking. It's, you know, sometimes
talking about it. You know, I think like my biggest fear when I was writing this book was like, I'm gonna have to talk about this, and like I'm gonna have to become the person that is healed, quote unquote, enough to be the writer of this book. And like everyone's gonna know. And like that is some scary stuff. But like once you actually do it, it's just like it's detached from me now. Like I'm nothing but proud of this body of work and these stories. I'm not afraid and I'm not ashamed, and like you know, and it healed me. It like completed my loop of purpose. So
fantastic. That's really,
yeah.
And it sounds like in a way what you were talking about earlier about showing that slight level of vulnerability when you're traveling was almost like preparing you for showing this massive more amount of vulnerability as you were writing your book.
Yeah. And I feel like that's definitely true. I feel like everything, you know, my background as a journalist, as a storyteller, as an interviewer of persons, like as a woman who creates space perpetually for other women to speak, whether on stage or virtually, like I think like I was born to do this. Like this is my purpose. And it's scary because it means I don't know like what of my travel businesses will remain in the wake of 2021 or 2 or whatever, you know. And yeah, I think just I'm constantly having to redefine like, you know, this isn't all that I am. It's not all that I do. And like travel will always be something that I am so passionate about, but I do think it is one of many tools that you can use to connect to your sense of capability and strength.
That's such a beautiful sentiment to end on.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Kelly. And do let us know when the book's
I will. Yeah, I will.
We'd love to read and listen. So do pass that on.
Thank you. Yeah, pre-orders are up on tellershecan't.com, and it's such an exciting like journey that I'm on. So thank you for letting me talk about it and for being a part of your community.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. See you in 2 weeks' time. Bye.